Hello, and thank you for watching this video about limiting factors. Before we dive into the science of limiting factors, let's talk about the word limit. Maybe you've heard it before and can think of some examples of limits. Maybe you've heard of a speed limit. While adults drive in the car, you might see speed limit signs along the road with numbers on them. The numbers are in units of miles per hour, or the speed at which people can drive. A speed limit tells adults the fastest speed they can drive on that road, but they aren't supposed to go over that. If they go faster than that, they could get a speeding ticket from a police officer, meaning they were driving too fast and they have to pay money as a punishment. Let's think of another example. Maybe someone in your house was baking fresh chocolate chip cookies. You want to eat all of the cookies because they are so good. But your mom or dad doesn't want you to get a tummy ache or spoil your dinner, and you have to save some for everyone else. So they tell you that you can only have 3 cookies. Your parent is saying that you can't have an unlimited number of cookies. You can only have 3. The limit is 3 cookies. So, what does this word limit mean? Well, there are a couple definitions that make sense. A limit could be a point or level where you have to stop. That fits with a speed limit. You have to stop once you have reached the maximum speed. It can also mean that you can't go beyond a certain point, or an area doesn't go beyond this point. Maybe you've seen signs for city limits too. Cities have limits. A city only fits within a certain area. They don't overlap. If you go over one city limit, you are then in another city, which has its own limits too. The next definition is a restriction on the size or amount of something. You can't have more than this amount. Your mom or dad put a limit on how many cookies you can have before dinner. So how do limits relate to ecosystems and populations? Why are we talking about this? Well, let me ask you a question. Can populations of organisms grow infinitely? Can you have hundreds or thousands or millions or billions of the same type of animal or plant living in an area? No, that would be crazy. You would never find 90 million squirrels living in your neighborhood. So this means that populations have limits. They can't just keep growing and growing and growing. Eventually, they are going to reach a maximum and stop growing. But why? I'd like you to pause this video now and brainstorm some reasons why the squirrel population in your neighborhood can't possibly reach 20 million. Hopefully, you came up with some great ideas. Here are some of mine. Not enough space. You simply could not have 90 million squirrels physically fit in my neighborhood. They would hardly be able to move. There also wouldn't be enough food to feed that many squirrels in such a small space. There might also not be enough water for them. There wouldn't be enough trees for them to live in. People sometimes have a tendency to kill squirrels too. Sometimes people shoot them, and sometimes we run over them with our cars on accident. If there were that many squirrels living in my neighborhood, I'm sure they would be all over the roads and lots would become roadkill. They would also likely get killed and eaten by predators. There might also be some bad weather that could kill them or cause environmental conditions to not provide enough food or shelter for them. There could also be some diseases that spread and cause populations to stay down. All of these different environmental conditions prevent squirrel populations from growing crazy big. It keeps the numbers down and reasonable. The population can only get so big. It has a limit. It has a limit because of all of these things called limiting factors. Each of these are examples of limiting factors that keep the population of the squirrels in check. On the previous slide, we looked at many examples of limiting factors that keep the squirrel populations in check. But how can we define limiting factor? A limiting factor is a condition in an organism's environment that limits its population size. It's something about its habitat that stops the population from getting bigger or causes it to get smaller. There are many general examples of limiting factors, such as amount of food and water, amount of space, amount of shelter, predators, disease, human activity, natural disasters, amount of oxygen, which is especially important for organisms who live in water, and amount of sunlight. With oxygen being a limiting factor, you may be thinking, well, that's silly. We have plenty of oxygen in the air we breathe. That's not going to run out. But it's a different story for organisms that live in ponds, lakes, oceans, and aquariums. Those things all need oxygen too, but they get it from the dissolved oxygen gas that is in the water. Sometimes, if there are too many animals living in the water, or if there aren't enough aquatic plants producing oxygen, or if the temperature changes, that can cause the oxygen level in the water to go down. The amount of oxygen in water is not infinite, so therefore you can't have an infinite number of animals living in it. In order for plants to grow, they need plenty of light and soil nutrients. If there are taller trees blocking light from reaching the forest floor, fewer plants can grow there. If there aren't enough nutrients in the soil that plants need to grow, fewer plants can grow there.